So now the stage has been set. A lot of interesting stuff has been said on energy justice, energy transition, and in my presentation you will see a lot of connection with the earlier presentations. So when we are talking about energy transition, a bigger debate is in the background, and that is about environmental changes, and how environmental changes are becoming a central question in today's time, and how that environmental change question is also related with the question of energy security and energy futures. So energy and environment are playing bigger role in today's discourse, but at the same time, when we are talking about energy future or environmental changes and environmental impact, then we are also talking about so many diverse social and political aspects which are tied to it. In the previous presentation, like Lucy mentioned about like how the earlier transition happened in an era when there were cheap energy sources available, and high carbon intensive development has led to the kind of industrialization which we see in today's time. And in the later presentation, you saw that like how even though Galicia is like quite ahead in terms of renewable energy deployment, but still like communities are facing the negative consequences of this particular kind of energy transition, where energy transition is again led by big companies, and the rural communities are not actively participating in this transition in making it more fairer. So in this context, I'm going to talk about energy democracy experiment in agrarian India, not in urban area, but in agrarian India. Some of you may be aware that India is still a predominantly rural country where large population resides in the rural area. And when these energy experiments are happening, then these rural areas are emerging as the frontier zone, like where many of these energy experiments are happening, are taking place. And that is why like often they are also coming up as sacrificial zones, like where a lot of sacrifices are going to be made. So is it going to be only the sacrificial zones, like where like sacrifices are going to be made by the rural community, or how these transitions can be made more just? That's the question, and this question has been answered in many other contexts, especially in the developing countries, by the example of energy democracy. And what is energy democracy? So when we are transitioning from fossil fuel based to renewable, when centralized to decentralized mode of energy production, it is all about resist, reclaim, and restructure the energy debate. So you have to resist the fossil fuel. You have to reclaim like energy transition, like which have been led by big companies, and then you have to restructure the whole like of production, distribution, and consumption pattern of energy. A lot of focus earlier was on centralized fossil fuel, but now like people are talking about decentralized renewables. And when they talk about energy democracy, there are three themes like which emerge in many of these energy democracy literature. First is the idea of associative democracy, how the local community can come together and think about producing new energy in their own vicinity with the local efforts, without direct or major input coming from the other actors like private sector or the public sector. The second stretch of literature on energy democracy focus more on the idea of deliberative democracy, where they argue that like there should be more space for deliberation, discussion, and participation. Like in the previous discussions, you also listened about that. And the third aspect is about material democracy, where people are arguing that the access to material sources through which energy is produced should also be made democratic. And especially like this becomes more relevant like when in earlier period when people have argued that solar energy is a communitarian technology. Solar technology is a communitarian technology, and one of the pioneering STS scholar has argued about this in the 80s, that how nuclear technology is an authoritarian technology, whereas solar technology is a communitarian technology. So in this context, I'm going to talk about, but a lot of this literature which deals with this kind of thing still takes like community at its face value, that communities are going to be the solution, and how communities always work in a just manner. So in this context, I'm going to analyze this understudied aspect of energy democracy analysis from the global south, because it has not been studied yet in many countries of the global south, and particularly in India, which is the biggest democracy in the world. But there has been no single study coming from energy studies, energy democracy from India. So this is going to be interesting. For instance, like in 2009, for the first time in the academic literature, the word energy democracy appeared. And later on, it has increased several times. By 2021, more than 40 articles were appearing like per year. And you can see like there is a rise in the literature on energy democracy. But still, majority of the literature is still focused in either in US or in some other developed countries, primarily in Europe. Majority of the institutions like studying these were also located in Europe and USA. So in this context, I'm going to talk about energy democracy in India and how this experiment can be studied. First of all, like there has been a very interesting energy democracy experiment in India that happened a few years back. Just like any other energy democracy experiments that had taken place in the developed world, this was again led by the civil society organizations, NGOs, like other cases. In some other cases, especially in the USA, like it has also been led by a number of trade unions. In Indian case, like it was not led by trade union groups, but it was led by NGOs and civil society organizations, which are quite active in India. But before talking about this case, just a little bit about like energy landscape of India. As you can see, like majority of the energy is still coming from coal, but a substantial increase has happened in the solar sector. Wind is also another major sector which is emerging up, while nuclear are still small. Hydro is again one of the oldest renewable, like which has been there for some years now. But very interesting changes in terms of like the new additions which are happening, and a number of new additions are happening in the solar sector. This is the solar power generation landscape in India. You can see like within India there is huge diversity. There are states like where there are higher installation of solar energy. There are states where there are lower installations of solar energy. Some of the western states like Gujarat and Rajasthan, and southern states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu are the leaders in solar energy installation, whereas like the eastern states are still like lagging behind. One important thing to keep in mind is that, like in the previous presentation, you have heard the word load shedding. I don't know how many of you have heard this word earlier, load shedding or power shedding. So power shedding is a very like peculiar thing, like which you will always hear in many developing countries, where there is not enough power available for certain period in the day, sometimes certain period in the month, like in different arrangements. And that is also the reality in India. And that is why like a lot of people still who do not have access to adequate energy. So energy poverty is rampant. So we are going to talk about energy democracy in a context where energy poverty has been rampant, development is uneven, but at the same time the national government is strongly pushing the idea of energy transition, or even like now, even in India, like the government is using the word just energy transition. So how we can make sense of just energy transition and energy democracy context in India, that is what we are going to discuss. As you know, like there can be different pathways for transition. Like one is the state-led transition, like where state is actively investing resources and even like putting production processes for energy transition. There can be market-led transitions, like in many cases you have seen like how public and or private companies are investing, and then the idea of community-led transitions, and the fourth is like the hybrid transitions, like where different categories are coming together to make a more complex energy mix. What I'm going to discuss in detail is the hybrid model which has been projected in this case. And this case is very interesting because in this, Greenpeace India came together with few other civil society organizations in Bihar, and they forged a collaboration with the local villagers to produce energy in a hybrid manner. So this is in environmental justice literature or in environmental studies literature often seen as the ideal case, that this is going to work. This is resisting the fossil, this is resisting the public, big public, this is resisting the private capital, so this is going to work. And this has been promoted a lot by civil society organizations in India. Like there are people who have argued that how even in the energy transition debate or in India, there are two groups, like one which is led by the state, which believes that coal is going to stay, and there is the other NGOs and civil society groups who is arguing that coal should not stay, we should completely go for the other. And how to go for the other is being devised. This is the pathway which has been devised. So in this context, I have studied this experiment done in rural Bihar. Rural Bihar is again very interesting case, as I have already mentioned that energy poverty is rampant. 89% of the population in this particular state is still rural. Like Galicia, like one of the rural province in Spain. The ecological footprint of the people residing in this state is very low. Energy consumption and energy use is also very low. So even if you compare at the national and regional variations, you will see like the per capita availability of energy or the per capita generation of CO2 at the national and the provincial level, there is huge difference. So we are talking about a very economically and socially underdeveloped region, and in this region there has been huge population who do not had access to electricity. So when electricity was supposed to be provided by the renewable energy, and that too through a hybrid model, it was assumed to be a role model, a good model, which need to be like emulated in other parts. This is the per capita energy consumption. In 2014, like you can see the difference, like it was only 203 kilowatt per hour, whereas the national average was more than 1000. Even by 2021, like the per capita availability of energy has increased, but it is still below the national average. In this context, I'm going to talk about the energy experiment which happened in Dharnai, and I'm going to analyze it in two ways, like at two sites, because this experiment has led to a release of energy manifesto, which was called as Energy Democracy Vision. And in this manifesto, different NGO groups, some academicians and some other groups working in the civil society domain came together and presented it as the role model, as the ideal model opposite to the state-led transitions which were happening. And they argued that this should be the vision for energy transition, and this is the energy democracy ideal. So, and this thing was widely reported in media, not only in the national media, but even in the international media. So first we are going to analyze the idea of energy democracy in the vision statement. I have already discussed that like the major organizers were like Kalpavriksha, which is one of the very popular and quite old environmental NGO in India, Greenpeace India, Selco, even Oxfam India, and several others were part of this. And they issued in 2016 this statement. So in terms of analysis, like when we talk about energy democracy, we are talking about like how more participatory decision making can be made possible, and how we can include diverse actors in the decision making process. So I have analyzed them along three categories, like equality in participation, who can participate, equality in agenda setting, who can set the agenda, and then questions of governance and justice. If you look at this literature along all these indicators, like there have been mention of different things, that how citizen involvement is needed, how spaces need to be provided, how like spaces should be provided for ensuring people participation in agenda setting, and how risk and benefit should be studied, what kind of model should be adopted, what models should be rejected. So for an interesting reflection, they are arguing that there is an urgent paradigm shift needed from the currently dominant model of consumption-led development to creating frameworks of human and ecological well-being. So all the right words are there and all the right ideals are there. Similarly, like principles of governance are mentioned. But when you analyze them in deep, then you see that like there is a talk for decentralization, but they do not talk about the pathways through which, or the mechanism through which, like the decentralization or these kind of participatory exercises can be ensured. So like even in the earlier cases, like people are even not at two level, at the dominant level also people are not clear how this energy transition is going to be achieved, but even in the alternate spaces, there is a clear-cut understanding that we need to have an energy transition in a just manner, but how to achieve that is still not well articulated. And one of the most, or two of the most important factors like which has been ignored in this, that they still do not talk about the processes of marginalization, like which is still unfolding in any society. And even in the Indian case, like how the processes of marginalization is making things more worse has not at all been debated. And one of the very crucial social category for India, that is caste, has been largely underplayed, or like not accepted or not acknowledged in the same manner which it should have. So caste is a very important social category, and it's very difficult to ignore. And what does this ignorance of caste implies in this context, we will discuss towards the end of the presentation. So this is about the analysis of the energy democracy vision. Now we are going to talk about the analysis of the case. So in this particular case, like just after the inauguration of this project in 2014, there were a lot of takers for this energy, solar energy off-grid connection. But within a year, like you can see that there has been a huge drop in several of the neighborhood in this particular village. And one important thing has happened in this particular context, that Greenpeace India invited the former chief minister of this province to inaugurate the project. And when the chief minister came, like there was a small group of farmers and some other workers who talked about, who argued that they do not want this energy and they want the real energy. And they argued that solar energy is fake energy and the conventional energy is the real energy. This was a big shock for the Greenpeace and the other organizations. It was also a shock for the chief minister, who also viewed that, because for the chief minister, it was also a new model. The Greenpeace India advocated to them that like this is going to be the new model for rural electrification. And he said that, okay, you go and do this experiment, and if this succeeds, we will adopt it at a much higher scale. But when he has been invited to inaugurate, he faced this reality. And then he promised that, okay, we are going to give you the conventional energy, and that was a game changer. And that has led to reduction in the connections, and like then the whole transition which was supposed to happen failed to happen in this particular case. So what is the idea coming out from this? Like there are different interpretation of technology. For Greenpeace and other actors, the universal assumption was there that solar energy is clean energy, solar energy is green energy, so this should be accepted. Whereas for the local villagers, they were more interested in the utilitarian aspect of the technology than the ascribed normative value which has been given to this particular technology and which is taken as granted in many other contexts. So when we analyze this case along the three pillars or the three categories which I mentioned, like the first is about the equality in participation. In this project, Greenpeace India and the partners assume that everyone is equal to participate because all of them are living without electricity for 30 years. So everyone is eager to get connected. But in this context, we can see that everyone was not eager to participate, and there were several reasons for this. So one of the farmer from the upper caste, dominant caste, said that I have not taken their connection and I do not need their electricity. So the normal assumption is like, and that was even the case in this particular case, that many of the upper caste farmer community, like who were holding land, have participated in this exercise, and they were active collaborators. But within this active collaborators community, there were others who have not participated and who have very from the very beginning disassociated themselves from this exercise for various social and political reasons. Similarly, there was another woman from a most vulnerable community. She said that if we were able to pay and would have paid, then why would we have been categorized as a Mahadalit? So this is again a very powerful statement, because in this hybrid model, which was based on the market principles, it was believed that like everyone should be able to pay and everyone will be paying, because the prices will be decided among themselves and everyone is capable of paying, because it is not imposed from outside but a communitarian decision taken by themselves. But then like there are people like who do not wanted to see themselves as mere consumers in this exercise and who asserted their vulnerable identity in while participating in this exercise. Similarly, in terms of agenda setting, there are different dimensions, but I will emphasize on only two. A small group was involved in this project for maintenance of this project. Two workers and one engineer. And the workers like who were engaged in this, they have said that in the initial year they have not got paid for 11 months, and they have reported this to the Greenpeace and the other actor. But after much effort, finally they were paid. So that clearly indicates like the agenda setting in terms of like how the finances is going to be managed. Everyone who had to be participating in this exercise had not participated. So there were not equality in agenda setting. Similarly, like another villager had stated that the system will not run by the revenue collected from the villagers, as this project was based on the assumption that the initial finances will be brought from outside, not by the state, but with civil society effort and from the private initiative. But once the project is installed, then it will be managed by the community. But the community members themselves were thinking that whatever money which is going to be generated from this project is not good enough for running the solar microgrid in itself. So you can again see like it was assumed that like agenda setting has been done in a more participatory manner, and that is what they have projected, because they organized a committee where they involved a lot of people. They came and they voted that yes, we want this, we will be paying for this. But when it started, when it became operational, all these kind of things started appearing, and which explains that like the way in which it had been shown as a participatory exercise was not the real participatory exercise that in fact has happened. Similarly, in terms of like questions of governance and justice, farmers still believe that the real electricity is through the conventional grid, and solar energy is not going to fulfill the energy requirements for all kind of purposes. Whereas to keep in mind, they have thought that the solar energy is going to be used for all kind of purposes, and that is why they have thought about installing solar pumps, using the energy for residential purpose, using the energy for commercial purpose. But the farmers assumed, and the farmers experienced when this experiment unfolded, that the energy which is available is not enough for all kind of purposes. And one common theme in energy studies is like when someone do not have electricity, when they start drawing electricity or using electricity, normally they move on the energy ladder, and it's a very standard practice. It has happened everywhere in the world. You do not go with the subsistence energy use throughout your like future use. You move from lower to higher, and that is what started happening in this case also. They assume that whatever subsistence amount of energy that is going to be generated would be good enough for everyone. But what happened is that like people started, those who had access, they started asking more, and those who were unable to participate in this exercise abandoned it, that it is not enough or it is not required for them for various reasons. Another question of identity and vulnerability, which is very important, is of the question of caste and even question of rurality. And as I mentioned earlier, that this is a rural area, so one of the women from again one of the most vulnerable community mentioned that kerosene lantern cannot be abandoned, that is going to stay. Electricity given by the state is just a fashion. So there is so much distrust on the state. There is so much distrust on the developmental model, which is often gets celebrated by other actors. In the previous presentation, you also saw that like how many of the actors were distrustful of the energy transition. They were afraid of their livelihood. They were afraid of their job. So there is huge distrust, and how we are going to manage this distrust. And in this context, I just want to bring this very important aspect of exclusion, dispossession, and deep-seated vulnerability. One of the very famous Dalit poet from India in the 80s has written about this popular poem on Thakur Ka Kuan, who the well belongs to, and the well belongs to the landlord. So in this whole poem, the poet is talking about the fireplace is made from mud, the mud is from the pond belongs to the landlord. He hungered for bread made of millet, the millet grows in the field belongs to the landlord. The bull belongs to the landlord, the plow belongs to the landlord, gripping the tips of the plow is our palm, the harvest belongs to the landlord. So the work is our, but whatever other is belongs to the landlord. So in the end, he is arguing, then what is ours? The village, the city, the nation. So it explains the deep-seated distrust, the deep-seated vulnerability, and the deep-seated dispossession that is prevalent among the most vulnerable community. So in this context, we have to talk about energy transition. In this context, we have to talk about energy democracy. So even though all the right languages have been used by the NGO, and the civil society actors, but the result has not as it was expected. The language of participation or equality in participation has been there rather than top-down, a community-driven bottom-up approach has been suggested. But then, like they have got collaboration from the elite sections of the farmers, but they have failed to accept, and they have failed to recognize the social justice questions, especially in context of India. So in terms of conclusion, like there are different interpretations of technology, and similarly there are different interpretations of energy democracy. For the middle class environmentalists from different parts of India, energy democracy is about participation and inclusion, but how very deep-seated vulnerabilities can be addressed, how historical injustices can be addressed, or how historical vulnerabilities and injustices can be overcome when we are going to make different people come together and decide a common future. So with this, in the literature or in this particular case, we see that the focus has been more on the economic rationale and not on other rationals. Similarly, democracy has been imagined more or less in terms of neoliberal democracy, where is it assumed that everyone in the country is free and everyone will be willing to participate and they are capable of participating, whereas like in this particular case, democratically people had disowned this exercise. So what has been projected as a democratic exercise has been proven that it was a sham emancipatory exercise. So that is why like it is important that we need to go beyond the neoliberal ideals of energy democracy and look for more robust and context-specific ideals of democracy which might work in diverse and highly divided societies, even in the era of climate change when we are becoming more and more polarized and where more and more international and like polarized voices are trying to homogenize the debate in terms of environment and economic transition. And with this, I conclude.